Chapter 9. The Fracture. The first sign of trouble came during the winter solstice celebration. Briar was in the Great Hall, watching Lightcaster children perform a traditional dance of illumination alongside wolf pups demonstrating coordinated shifting patterns. The audience, a mix of all three bloodlines, applauded enthusiastically as shadows and light wove together in harmony. Then the Genesis stone cracked. Not a small fracture, but a deep, resonating split that sent a shockwave through the castle. Every person with magical sensitivity doubled over as the harmonic that had sustained the kingdom's unity faltered. Briar felt it like a physical wound, one of her dual hearts stuttering violently, the other racing to compensate. Through her bond, she felt Kael's wolf howl in distress. "What's happening?" Darius shouted over the sudden chaos as nobles and commoners alike scrambled for the exits. Briar forced herself upright, stumbling toward the throne room, where the Genesis stone stood. Kael was beside her instantly, supporting her weight as her newly enhanced senses went haywire.
The stone was dying.
Where once it had pulsed with silver and gold and shadow in perfect balance, now the colors warred with each other. Silver pushed against gold. Shadow tried to consume both. The unity that had held for 6 months was fracturing before their eyes. "This can't be happening," Elder Morphia gasped, arriving breathless behind them. "The Genesis stone is eternal. It can't simply—" Another crack split the stone's surface, and this time, the shockwave was worse. Outside, the Genesis pillars across the landscape flickered and dimmed. In the academies, children with newly manifested Genesis abilities screamed as their powers turned chaotic. "It's rejecting something," Briar said, pressing her hand to the stone despite the pain it caused. Through her connection, she felt the stone's distress. "Something's forcing the bloodlines apart again." "Impossible," Kael said. "We've had 6 months of successful integration." The land itself responded to unity. "What could possibly—" "Not what," Marcus said, appearing in the throne room doorway, his face grave. "Who?" Behind him stood a figure Briar had never seen, tall, draped in robes that seemed woven from starlight and void in equal measure. Their face was hidden beneath a hood, but power radiated from them in waves that made even the dying Genesis stone seem dim by comparison. "Greetings, Genesis Bridge," the figure said, their voice layered with harmonics that suggested both masculine and feminine, both ancient and ageless. "I am Kael, keeper of the original separation, and I've come to correct your mistake." Kael moved instantly, placing himself between Briar and the intruder. Darius and a dozen guards drew weapons. But Marcus held up a hand, his expression pained. "They're from the First Council," Marcus said quietly. "The original beings who separated light and shadow and wolf during the Great Severing. I didn't know any still existed." "Most don't," Kael said, lowering their hood to reveal features that shifted constantly, sometimes appearing wolf-like, sometimes ethereal as pure light, sometimes shadowed beyond recognition. "I am the last, the final guardian of the separation that kept this world from tearing itself apart." "You're the one destroying the Genesis stone," Briar said, understanding the dawning cold and terrible. "You're forcing the bloodlines to separate again." "I'm restoring the natural order," Kael corrected. "What you've done here, this forced unity, it's beautiful, I'll admit. Idealistic. Noble, even. But it's fundamentally unstable. The bloodlines were separated for a reason." "Because of fear," Briar challenged, stepping around Kael despite his protective growl. "Because people couldn't handle the idea that different powers could coexist." "Because the powers themselves couldn't coexist," Kael replied. "Not permanently. Light and shadow are oppositional forces. When they mix without proper containment, they don't create harmony, they create chaos. Destruction on a scale you can't imagine. But the Genesis stone is an anomaly. A temporary stabilization that will inevitably collapse, taking your kingdom and possibly this entire region with it when it does." Kael's shifting eyes fixed on her. "I've seen it before, child. Watched civilizations rise on the promise of unity, only to be obliterated when that unity proved unsustainable. So you're here to destroy what we've built, Kael snarled. Before we even have a chance to prove you wrong. I'm here to prevent catastrophe, Cashin said. The Genesis Stone is already failing. Can't you feel it? The strain of holding 3 opposing forces in balance? It's breaking under its own weight. In a matter of days, perhaps hours, it will shatter completely. And when it does, the resulting explosion will level everything within 100 miles. The throne room fell into shocked silence. You're lying, Vesper said from the doorway, her young voice defiant despite her trembling. Behind her stood Jax and the other children with Genesis abilities, drawn by the disturbance. The stone wouldn't hurt us. It's part of us. And that, Cashin said gently, is precisely the problem. You children are bound to an unstable power source. When it fails, it will take you with it. All of you. Briar felt sick. She looked at the cracked Genesis stone, felt its failing pulse echoing her own dual heartbeats, and knew with horrible certainty that Cashin wasn't lying. The stone was dying, and they had no idea how to save it. There is a solution, Cashin continued. Allow me to complete the separation. The bloodlines can still coexist, but at a distance. Wolves in their territories, Lightcasters in theirs, shadow-touched in the wastes where they belong. Peaceful coexistence through proper boundaries. That's not coexistence, Marcus said sharply. That's segregation. Isolation masked as safety. It's survival, Cashin countered. And it's the only option that doesn't end in mass death. I take no pleasure in this, Shadow King. But I've lived long enough to know that some ideals, however beautiful, are simply incompatible with reality. Briar stared at the Genesis stone, at the children clustered in the doorway, at Kael whose bond with her thrummed with shared anguish. 6 months of progress. Of children learning that difference didn't mean danger. Of old enemies becoming friends. Of a kingdom that had dared to believe in something better. All of it crumbling because the foundation they'd built on was fundamentally flawed. How long? She asked quietly. Until complete failure? Cashin studied the stone with eyes that had witnessed millennia. 3 days. Perhaps 4. The deterioration is accelerating. And if we let you separate the bloodlines, the children with Genesis abilities will lose their powers, but survive. The integration will dissolve. Those who've mixed bloodline magic too thoroughly may experience discomfort during the separation, but casualties will be minimal. Cashin paused. Compared to total annihilation, it's the merciful choice. There has to be another way, Kael insisted. There isn't, Cashin said flatly. I've searched for centuries. Studied every attempt at unity between the bloodlines. They all end the same way, in fire and ash and regret. This is mercy, King Kael. Let me spare you the guilt of watching your kingdom burn. Briar felt the weight of every eye in the room on her. The Genesis Queen. The bridge between bloodlines. The symbol of impossible unity. And now, possibly, the architect of catastrophe. I need time, she said. 3 days, you said we had 3 days. Give me that time to find another solution. There is no other solution, Cashin repeated, but not unkindly. But if it brings you peace to try, I won't stop you. 3 days. Then I complete the separation, with or without your consent. The alternative is too terrible to permit. The keeper turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, Genesis Bridge, I'm sorry. What you attempted here was brave and beautiful. It simply wasn't possible. Their eyes, currently more light than shadow, held genuine regret. Some walls exist for good reasons. Tearing them down doesn't always lead to freedom. Sometimes it just leads to chaos. Cashin vanished, dissolving into starlight and void. The throne room erupted into panic, nobles demanding answers, guards seeking orders, children crying as their Genesis abilities flickered and failed. Through it all, Briar stood frozen, staring at the cracked Genesis stone that pulsed weakly, dying more with each passing moment. She'd believed unity was possible. Had staked everything, her life, her love, her kingdom, on that belief. And now she had 72 hours to prove the last keeper of the separation wrong. Or watch everything she'd built crumble to ash. Chapter 10. The Search for Salvation. The war room had never felt so oppressive. Maps covered every surface, ancient texts pulled from the castle's deepest archives, diagrams of the Genesis stone structure, charts tracking its deterioration. Briar had been studying them for 16 hours straight, refusing sleep despite her dual heart's increasingly erratic rhythm. "You need to rest," Kael said for the 10th time, though his tone had shifted from concern to desperation. "I'll rest when we find an answer," Briar replied, not looking up from the manuscript Elder Morphia had unearthed. It described the original Great Severing in painful detail, how the First Council had determined that light, shadow, and wolf were incompatible forces whose mixing would lead to apocalyptic destruction. What if Cassion's right? The question came from Marcus, who'd barely left the war room since the Keeper's appearance. What if there is no answer? What if the best we can do is minimize casualties? "Then we've failed," Briar said flatly. "Failed every child who believed unity was possible. Failed every person who dared to hope for something better." "Better dead than segregated?" Malwick challenged. He'd joined their emergency council, along with Calypso, Gavel, and several other representatives. "That's not a choice. That's pride refusing to accept reality." "It's not pride," Vesper interjected. The young Lightcaster had appointed herself Briar's assistant, refusing to leave despite multiple orders. "It's faith." The Queen survived 6 years of impossible torture. She created the Genesis Stone when every law of nature said she shouldn't exist. If anyone can find a solution, it's her. "Faith doesn't change physics," Lysander said gently. He'd been monitoring the Genesis Stone's deterioration with increasingly grim reports. The stone's structural integrity has decreased another 12% in the last 6 hours. At this rate, we have less than 2 days before catastrophic failure. Less than 2 days. 48 hours to save everything they'd built. Briar's vision blurred with exhaustion, the text swimming before her eyes. She felt Kael's hands on her shoulders, steadying her. "You're going to collapse," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "And then what? You can't save the kingdom if you're unconscious." "I can't save it consciously either," Briar admitted, the words tasting like ash. "Everything I've read confirms what Cassion said. Light and shadow are oppositional forces. Mixing them creates instability. The only societies that attempted it destroyed themselves within a generation." "But we lasted 6 months," Kael countered. "That's longer than any previous attempt. Maybe we're doing something differently. Or maybe we're just prolonging the inevitable," Marcus said grimly. He pulled out another scroll, this one bearing the seal of the Shadow Court. "I found records of the last unified kingdom, the Radiant Empire, they called themselves. 5 years of prosperity before the Genesis Stone equivalent they'd created went critical. The explosion was visible from 3 provinces away. Nothing survived within 200 miles. The room fell silent. "So we're waiting for a bomb to explode," Malwick said. "And our only option is controlled detonation versus uncontrolled catastrophe." "No," Jack said from the corner where he'd been sitting quietly with the other Genesis children. His hands glowed with the unstable silver-gold shadow power that now caused him physical pain. "There has to be another way. Has to be." "Why?" Calypso asked not unkindly. "Why must there be another way? Sometimes reality simply is what it is." "Because the stone chose us," Jax insisted. "When Queen Briar first touched it, it could have rejected her, could have killed her. Instead, it transformed, created something new. That wasn't an accident. That was the purpose." Briar looked at the boy, barely 14 but carrying wisdom beyond his years. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we're asking the wrong question," Jack said. "We keep trying to figure out how to save the Genesis Stone as it is. But what if it's not meant to stay as it is? What if the cracking isn't failure? It's transformation." "Transformation into what?" Elder Morphia asked, leaning forward with sudden interest. "I don't know," Jax admitted. "But when I manifested Genesis power, it hurt at first. My body rejected it because it didn't understand what was happening. Then Queen Briar touched my hands, and everything stabilized. Not because she stopped the transformation, because she helped me accept it. Briar stared at the boy, then at the maps and manuscripts covering the war room. They'd been approaching this wrong, trying to maintain stability, to preserve what they'd created exactly as it was. But nothing in nature remained static. Everything evolved or died. The stone isn't breaking, she breathed. It's evolving, trying to become something that can sustain unity permanently instead of temporarily. But it's failing, Lysander objected. The structural integrity. Because it's fighting itself, Briar interrupted, pieces clicking into place. Light and shadow and wolf are still treating each other as separate forces trying to coexist. But true unity isn't coexistence, it's integration. Becoming something entirely new. She moved to the Genesis stone's diagram, her exhaustion forgotten. Look at the crack pattern. It's not random, it's symmetrical, like a seed splitting open to release what's inside. Kael studied the diagram. You think there's something inside the stone? I think we're inside the stone, Briar said. All of us. Every person who's connected to Genesis power. We're the seeds it's trying to release. But we're holding on to our individual identities, light or shadow or wolf, instead of accepting that we're becoming something that transcends all three. That's insane, Malwick said, but his tone held uncertainty rather than conviction. Is it? Marcus asked. We've already seen children manifesting mixed abilities. The land itself transformed in response to Genesis power. Why shouldn't the people transform too? Because transformation on that scale has never been documented, Lysander said. We'd be talking about fundamental changes to bloodline magic itself, to the very nature of what defines light, shadow, and wolf. Exactly, Briar said. That's what Kashin fears. Not that we'll fail, that we'll succeed. That will become something the First Council never anticipated. Something that makes their ancient separation irrelevant. Elder Morphea's eyes grew wide. The prophecy. I always interpreted bridge between bloodlines as a metaphor. But what if it's literal? What if you're not connecting three separate peoples? You're transforming them into one new person. The implications hung heavy in the war room. That's not unity, Calypso said slowly. That's assimilation. Losing everything that makes us distinct. Or, Briar countered, it's synthesis. Keeping what matters from each bloodline while creating something stronger than any of them alone. She looked at Jax and the other Genesis children. They haven't lost their individual natures. Jax is still primarily light. Tiernan is still primarily wolf. But they've gained abilities from other bloodlines without sacrificing their core identities. So, your solution is to trigger mass transformation? Kael asked carefully. Turn the entire kingdom into Genesis beings? Not force, Briar clarified. Invite. Those who want to evolve with the stone, who want to become part of this new synthesis, they participate. Those who don't can be safely separated before the transformation completes. And how exactly do we accomplish this impossible transformation? Malwick demanded. Briar looked at the cracked Genesis stone pulsing weakly in the throne room beyond. We stop fighting what it's trying to become. We don't try to heal the cracks, we help it break open completely. Guide the transformation, instead of resisting it. That could kill everyone connected to Genesis power, Lysander warned. If the transformation fails midway through, then we die trying to create something better, Briar said simply. Instead of accepting segregation because we're too afraid to risk evolution. Silence fell over the war room as everyone processed what she was suggesting. Finally, Kael spoke. If you're wrong, you'll destroy the kingdom you've been trying to save. I know, Briar said. If you're right, you'll change the fundamental nature of three ancient bloodlines. I know that too. And you're certain this is our only option? Briar looked at her mate, this man who'd followed her through every impossible choice, and told him the truth. No, I'm not certain of anything. But I'd rather die trying to build something new than live knowing we accepted defeat because we were too afraid of change. Through their bond, she felt his fear, his doubt, his absolute certainty that he would stand beside her regardless. Then we try, Kael said. But we give people a choice. Those who want to participate in this transformation volunteer. Those who don't evacuate beyond the blast radius in case you're wrong. Agreed, Briar said. I'm staying, Jax said immediately. The other Genesis children nodded, their young faces determined despite their fear. As am I, Marcus said. If there's even a chance this works, I want to be part of building what comes next. One by one, others in the war room committed. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to believe that evolution was worth the risk. We have 40 hours, Briar said. 40 hours to prepare, to give people real choice, and to guide the Genesis Stone's transformation instead of trying to stop it. And if Cassian interferes? Calypso asked. Then we hope they're willing to watch history instead of repeating it, Briar replied. As the war room emptied, people rushing to prepare for either transformation or evacuation, Kael pulled Briar close. This is madness, he murmured against her hair. Yes, Briar agreed. We could all die. Yes. Or we could become something the world's never seen. Yes. Kael pulled back to look at her, his golden eyes searching hers. No regrets. Briar thought of the dungeon cell where she'd spent 6 years. Thought of the girl who'd believed herself an abomination. Thought of everything she'd survived to reach this impossible moment. Only one, she said. That we didn't have more time. But we work with what we're given. Together, Kael said. Together, Briar agreed. 40 hours until the Genesis Stone shattered completely. 40 hours to trigger a transformation that would either save their kingdom or destroy it. 40 hours to prove that evolution was stronger than fear. The countdown had begun. Chapter 11. The Choice. Dawn broke over a kingdom divided. On the eastern fields beyond the castle walls, thousands had gathered. Those who chose to evacuate rather than risk the transformation. Entire families, noble houses, merchant guilds. Nearly 40% of Silverpeak's population had decided that survival through separation was preferable to the uncertain promise of evolution. Briar watched them from the battlements, her dual hearts aching with each departure. Don't, Kael said, reading her thoughts through their bond. Don't take their fear as personal failure. How can I not? Briar asked. We promised them unity, safety. And now we're asking them to risk everything on a theory that might be completely wrong. You're giving them a choice, Kael corrected. That's more than the first council ever did. More than the old kings did. Choice is the foundation of real unity. Below, Captain Darius was organizing the evacuation with military precision. Supply wagons, medical tents, enough provisions to sustain the refugees for weeks if necessary. Kael had emptied the royal treasury to ensure that those who left did so with resources to rebuild elsewhere if the transformation failed. Your Majesty, a voice called from behind them. Briar turned to find a delegation approaching, 12 people representing those who'd chosen to stay. Among them were Jax and Vesper, Elder Morphia and Lysander, Malwick and Gavel, Calypso and Marcus. And to Briar's surprise, Counselor Rhiannon, who'd been vocally skeptical of Genesis power. We've been discussing the transformation, Rhiannon said, without preamble. And we have questions that need answering before we proceed. Of course, Briar said, grateful for pragmatism over blind faith. First, what exactly will happen to those who participate? Rhiannon pulled out a ledger. Lysander has theories, but theories aren't answers. We need specifics. I don't have specifics, Briar admitted. I've never guided a Genesis transformation of this scale. But based on what happened to me, to Jax and the other children, I can offer probabilities. She gestured them toward the war room where diagrams and notes covered every surface, the work of 30 sleepless hours. The Genesis Stone is trying to complete a fundamental change in how bloodline magic functions, Briar explained, pointing to crystalline structures she'd drawn. Currently, light, shadow, and wolf are distinct powers that occasionally interact. The transformation would make them facets of a single unified power, like how white light contains all colors, but you can still access individual wavelengths when needed. So, we wouldn't lose our individual natures? Calypso asked. Not lose, expand, Briar clarified. A Lightcaster would still be primarily light, but would gain access to shadow and wolf abilities. A wolf would maintain shifting capability, but could channel light or shadow through that form. The core identity remains, but the boundaries become flexible. And the risks? Malwick pressed. Briar took a breath. Honest answer? I don't know. The transformation could fail midway, leaving participants trapped between bloodlines. Could cause permanent physical changes, additional hearts like mine, altered appearance, unstable powers. Could even result in death if someone's biology can't handle the integration. Yet you're asking us to volunteer for this, Rhiannon said, her tone unreadable. I'm asking you to choose, Briar corrected. No judgment either way. Those who evacuate aren't cowards. Those who stay aren't heroes. You're just people making the best decision you can with incomplete information. Elder Morphia studied the diagrams with ancient eyes. The First Council separated the bloodlines because they believed mixing was catastrophic. What makes you certain they were wrong? I don't, Briar said simply. But I know they were afraid. And fear-based decisions rarely lead to wisdom. They saw chaos and assumed destruction. Maybe what they actually saw was a transformation they didn't understand. That's a lot of maybes to stake our lives on, Rhiannon observed. It is, Briar agreed. Which is why I'm not asking for faith. I'm asking for courage. The courage to risk known safety for uncertain possibilities. Marcus spoke for the first time, his transformed eyes distant. The Radiant Empire, the last kingdom that attempted this, failed because they tried to force unity through conquest, through mandatory mixing and suppression of individual bloodline identity. The Genesis stone they created was a prison, not a bridge. He looked at Briar. What you're proposing is different. Optional evolution. Maintaining individual choice while creating space for those who want to become something new. That's never been tried before. Because it's insane, Gavel said, though his empathic abilities showed he understood the desperate necessity behind the insanity. But remaining static while the Genesis stone shatters around us is equally insane. At least this way we die trying to create something instead of just avoiding destruction. Comforting, Rhiannon said dryly. I'm not here to comfort you, Gavel replied. I'm here to tell the truth. And the truth is that Kashin isn't entirely wrong. The separation has maintained stability for centuries. What Briar's proposing could end catastrophically. But, he continued, his voice softening, I've spent 6 months feeling the emotions of every person in this castle. The children with Genesis abilities, they're not suffering from power mixing. They're thriving, growing stronger, more balanced, more whole than any pure bloodline child I've encountered. That has to mean something. Silence as the delegation processed this. How long until the stone reaches critical failure? Malwick asked. 18 hours, Lysander reported. Give or take 3 hours depending on the deterioration rate. And how long do we have to make our final decisions? Briar checked the preparations. Evacuations need to be completed within 12 hours for safe distance. That gives people 6 hours to decide whether they're staying or leaving. 6 hours to choose our entire future, Rhiannon said. Wonderful. The biggest decisions often have the smallest windows, Elder Morphia observed. The moment you realize you're falling in love. The instant you choose to fight or flee. The split second that determines whether you catch a child before they hit the ground. She looked at each delegation member in turn. This choice is like that. No amount of deliberation will provide certainty. At some point, you simply have to leap. Easy for you to say, Rhiannon muttered. You've lived centuries. The rest of us only get one life to risk. Which is precisely why your choice matters more, Morphia countered gently. The delegation dispersed to consult with their constituents, leaving Briar and Kael alone with Marcus and Elder Morphia. You should evacuate, Briar told Morphia. You're too important to risk on my theory. Child, Morphia said with a smile that held eons of wisdom, I've been alive so long that caution has become boring. If this is my end, at least it will be interesting. Besides, someone needs to document what happens. For history, you understand. And you? Briar asked Marcus. You've only recently begun redemption. You could continue that work somewhere safer. Redemption through running? Marcus shook his head.
No.
I helped create the circumstances that led to this crisis. I'll see it through to whatever end comes. Besides, he glanced toward where Jax and the other Genesis children were preparing. Those children remind me too much of you at their age. If they're brave enough to face transformation, the least I can do is stand with them. Kael's hand found Briar's. We should rest. 6 hours until decisions finalize, and you haven't slept in 2 days. I can't. You can, Kael interrupted firmly. Because if you collapse from exhaustion in the middle of the transformation, we all die anyway. 4 hours of sleep. Then you can obsess over last-minute preparations. Briar wanted to argue, but her dual hearts were increasingly erratic, her Genesis power flickering with exhaustion. She nodded reluctantly. Their private chambers felt like a sanctuary, quiet after days of chaos. Kael guided her to their bed, pulling her close. Are you afraid? She whispered against his chest. Terrified, Kael admitted. But not of transformation. Of losing you. If this goes wrong. We go wrong together, Briar finished. That was always the deal. Through their bond, she felt his love, fierce and unconditional. Felt his absolute commitment to whatever came next. No regrets, she asked. Only one, Kael said. That I didn't find you sooner. That you suffered 6 years in darkness while I sat on a throne, ignorant of what was happening beneath my own castle. The past made us who we are, Briar said. Change it, and we might not have created the Genesis Bridge at all. Might not have learned that transformation is possible. Wise words for someone about to trigger the most dangerous transformation in history. I contain multitudes, Briar said with a tired smile. Kael kissed her forehead. Sleep, little star. Tomorrow we either make history or become it. Briar closed her eyes, feeling her mate's heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Outside, the kingdom prepared for either exodus or evolution. The Genesis stone pulsed weakly, 18 hours from complete failure. And somewhere beyond the castle walls, Cashin waited, watching to see if this impossible attempt would finally succeed where all others had failed. Or if history would simply repeat itself one more tragic time. Sleep claimed Briar quickly, her exhausted body dragging her into dreams of light and shadow dancing together, neither consuming the other, both becoming something entirely new. When she woke 4 hours later, the kingdom's choice would be clear. And the transformation would begin. Chapter 12. The Transformation. Briar woke to silence. Not the peaceful quiet of early morning, but the heavy stillness of a kingdom holding its breath. Through the windows, she could see the evacuation had completed, the eastern fields now empty except for supply wagons disappearing toward the horizon. Those who'd chosen to leave were gone. Those who'd chosen to stay were waiting. Kael was already awake, standing by the window in full ceremonial armor. Not the leather and fur of everyday wear, but the ancient regalia of Alpha Kings, silver-threaded black plate that had been worn during the kingdom's founding. How many stayed? Briar asked, though part of her feared the answer. 53%, Kael replied. More than I expected, honestly. Nearly 20,000 people chose possible transformation over certain safety. Briar joined him at the window, looking down at the courtyard where people gathered. Wolves and Lightcasters and shadow-touched, all waiting for their queen to either save them or destroy them. The Genesis children, she asked. All staying. Jax insisted. Said they're already transforming. Might as well see it through. Kael turned to face her. Vesper wanted me to tell you something. She said even if this fails, even if she dies, she's grateful. That 6 months of real freedom was worth more than a lifetime of safe imprisonment. Briar's eyes burned with unshed tears. She's 14. She shouldn't have to make choices like this. None of us should, Kael agreed. But here we are anyway. He helped her into her own ceremonial attire. Not the wedding gown, but something Elder Morphia had created specifically for this moment. White fabric that shimmered between silver and gold and shadow gray, embroidered with patterns that seemed to move across the material. The pendant from her mother rested against her chest, warm with stored light. "Ready?" Kael asked. "No," Briar admitted. "But we're out of time." They descended to the throne room where the Genesis stone waited, barely holding together now, its surface spider-webbed with cracks that pulsed with chaotic energy. Around it stood the inner circle: Marcus and Elder Morphia, Lysander and Darius, Malwick and Gavel and Calypso, Rhiannon and the Genesis children. Everyone who'd chosen to stay was connected to the stone through thin threads of light, visible only to those with Genesis sight. Briar could see the network spanning the entire castle, linking thousands of people in a web of shared choice. "Status," she asked Lysander. 2 hours until critical failure," the healer reported. "Maybe less. The stone's deterioration is accelerating." "Then we begin now," Briar said. She moved to stand before the Genesis stone, Kael on her right, Marcus on her left. The symbolic positioning wasn't lost on anyone. Wolf, light, and shadow unified in purpose. "People of Silver Peak," Briar's voice carried through the castle and beyond, amplified by Genesis power. "What we attempted today has never been done. The first council separated our bloodlines because they feared what mixing would create. They chose stability through isolation over growth through integration." She placed her hand on the cracked Genesis stone. "We choose differently. Not because we're unafraid, I'm terrified. But because fear is a reason to be careful, not a reason to stop trying. In a moment, I'm going to stop fighting the stone's deterioration. Instead, I'll guide it, help it complete the transformation it's been struggling toward. Those of you connected through the network will feel that change. It will be painful, disorienting. Some of you may not survive." Absolute honesty. They deserved that much. If at any point you want to disconnect, simply release your connection to the stone. You'll be safely separated from the transformation. No judgment, no shame. This is a choice, always a choice, until the very end. She looked at the assembled people, at faces young and old, wolf and light and shadow, all watching her with a mixture of hope and terror. To those who stay through to completion, you're not just transforming yourselves. You're transforming what's possible. You're proving that evolution is stronger than fear, that unity isn't weakness, that becoming something new doesn't mean losing what we were. Briar took a breath. And if we fail, if this ends in the catastrophe Cashin predicted, then at least we failed while reaching for something better. That will have to be enough. She closed her eyes, feeling the Genesis stone's chaotic pulse beneath her palm. Felt the network of connected souls waiting for her guidance. "Together," she whispered, and released her control. The Genesis stone shattered. Not exploded, shattered like ice hit with precise force, breaking along predetermined fracture lines into thousands of perfect shards. Each shard blazed with concentrated Genesis power, spinning in the air like a galaxy of impossible stars. Pain hit Briar first, her dual heart seizing as the transformation forced its way through every cell. She felt herself breaking apart at the molecular level, light and shadow and something beyond both tearing through her biology. Through the bond, she felt Kael's agony matching hers. Felt his wolf trying to reject the foreign magic, then slowly, painfully, beginning to accept it. Around the throne room, people screamed. Some disconnected immediately, their threads to the Genesis network severing as they chose survival over transformation. Briar felt each disconnection like a small loss, but she didn't blame them. The pain was worse than anything she described, but others held on. Jax, his young body convulsing as light and shadow and something primal rewrote his genetics. Vesper, tears streaming down her face, but her connection to the stone unwavering. Marcus, experiencing his second transformation in 6 months, this one voluntary instead of forced. Elder Morphia, whose ancient body seemed almost eager for the change. Malwick and Gavel and Calypso, gritting through pain that would have killed most people. And through it all, the Genesis stone shards spun faster, creating a vortex of power that pulled at reality itself. Then Cashin appeared. The keeper of the original separation materialized in the throne room center, their shifting forms solidifying into something almost fully present. "Stop this," Kael commanded, their voice carrying harmonics that made the stone shards falter. "You're tearing reality's fabric, creating a wound that cannot be healed. Or healing a wound that's existed for centuries," Briar gasped through the pain. "You don't know. You're guessing based on fear. I'm acting based on witnessing this exact scenario destroy 12 civilizations," Kael interrupted. "I won't let it happen again." The keeper raised both hands, and void energy poured from them. Not destructive, but suppressive. The Genesis stone shards began to slow, their spin losing momentum. "No," Jack shouted. The boy's body was glowing with barely contained power. "You can't. We're so close." "Child, I'm saving you," Kael said, almost gently. "Saving all of you from a choice you don't understand." "We understand perfectly," Marcus said, his voice strained but certain. "We understand that you're afraid, that you've convinced yourself stability matters more than growth. But you're wrong. I've witnessed millennia and learned nothing," Elder Morphia interrupted, her ancient eyes blazing. "You've spent eons preventing change instead of guiding it, maintaining the separation instead of asking why it fails when forced but might succeed when chosen." The Genesis stone shards were slowing further. Briar could feel the transformation stalling, the people connected to it crying out as their bodies were caught mid-change. If Kael succeeded in stopping them now, those partially transformed would be trapped, neither fully unified nor safely separated. Living contradictions that would tear themselves apart from the inside. "You have to let us finish," Briar pleaded. "Even if we fail, stopping us midway will kill everyone still connected." "A mercy compared to what comes if you succeed," Kael said, but there was uncertainty in their voice now. "What if you're wrong?" Kael asked, his wolf form partially emerged, caught mid-shift with silver light and shadow tracings visible beneath his fur. "What if the civilizations you watched destroy themselves failed, because they were forced? Because someone decided unity was mandatory rather than voluntary?" "We're not forcing anyone," Vesper added, her young voice surprisingly strong. "Half the kingdom evacuated. We gave them a real choice. Maybe that's what all those other attempts lacked." Kael stared at her, then at Jax and the other Genesis children caught mid-transformation, suffering but refusing to disconnect. "Your children," the keeper said softly. "You don't understand what you're risking." "We're the future," Jax corrected, "whether you allow it or not." For a long moment, Kael stood frozen, void energy still suppressing the Genesis stone shards. The entire throne room held its breath. Then, slowly, the keeper lowered their hands. "If this destroys you," Kael said quietly, "I'll ensure the survivors know you died believing in something impossible. That will have to suffice for memorization." The void energy dissipated. The Genesis stone shards exploded back into motion, spinning faster than before, making up for lost time. And the transformation resumed with doubled intensity. Briar felt her body breaking apart completely now, not dying, but dissolving into component elements only to be reformed into something that had never existed. Her dual hearts synchronized for the first time, beating as one organ with two chambers. Her Genesis power, once chaotic and unstable, suddenly found perfect balance. Light and shadow and wolf, no longer fighting for dominance, but functioning as a unified whole. Around the throne room, others were experiencing the same completion. Jax's convulsions stopped, his body settling into a new configuration that radiated all three powers in harmony. Vesper's tears turned from pain to wonder as her light gained the strength of shadow and the primal force of wolf nature. Even Marcus, who'd already been transformed once, seemed to find a deeper integration, his empathic abilities expanding to encompass not just emotion but the fundamental connections between all living things. The Genesis stone shards began to merge, not back into their original form, but into something entirely new. Instead of one large stone, they created hundreds of smaller stones, each perfect and complete. These stones drifted through the throne room, seeking their matched souls. One landed in Briar's palm, warm and pulsing with recognition. Another found Kael, one each for Marcus and Morphia, and all the Genesis children. Every person who'd stayed through to completion received their own Genesis stone, not a shared source to fight over, but individual expressions of unified power. Impossible, Kael breathed. The stones shouldn't be able to separate. Each fragment should be incomplete, unstable. Unless they're not fragments, Elder Morphia said, her voice altered by transformation, deeper, richer, layered with power. Unless they're seeds. The original stone wasn't meant to be preserved, it was meant to reproduce. To create a generation of beings who each carry unity within themselves. Kael stared at the transformed beings filling the throne room. At the Genesis children who now stood straighter, stronger, more whole than before. At the adults whose ancient prejudices had been literally burned away by cellular transformation. You've created something new, the keeper said slowly. Not wolf or light or shadow, but a synthesis that transcends all three. We've created what was always meant to be, Briar corrected. Before fear separated us. Before the first council decided division was safer than unity. She looked at her personal Genesis stone, feeling it pulse in rhythm with her dual hearts. Felt the thousands of other stones throughout the castle doing the same, each unique, each complete, each connected to all the others through threads of shared transformation. The question is, Briar continued, looking directly at Kael, what will you do now? Will you try to undo what we've become? Or will you finally accept that evolution happened whether you approve or not? The keeper stood silent for a long time, their shifting forms cycling through expressions of doubt and wonder, and something that might have been grief for their own certainty finally proven wrong. I'll watch, Kael said finally. And documents. And pray to forces older than myself that you're right. That voluntary unity where forced unity failed. They paused. And if you succeed, if you build something lasting, I'll ensure the First Council's remaining knowledge is shared with you. Perhaps it's time we stopped hoarding the lessons of failure and started sharing them. With that, Kael dissolved back into starlight and void, leaving the transformed beings to discover what they'd become. Briar looked around the throne room at her people, no longer purely wolf or light or shadow, but something that honored all three while being constrained by none. The transformation was complete. Now came the harder part, learning to live with what they'd created. Chapter 13. The New Beginning. 3 days after the transformation, Briar stood in the Grand Observatory, a tower that had once been used to track celestial movements, but now served a different purpose. Through specially crafted windows, she could see the refugees returning. Not all of them. Perhaps a third had chosen to remain in their new settlements, unable or unwilling to face what Silver Peak had become. But the rest were coming back, drawn by curiosity, by family ties, by the simple fact that this was home regardless of what magic now dwelled within it. They're afraid, Kael observed, joining her at the window. His transformation had settled beautifully. He could still shift into his wolf form, but now silver light traced through his fur and shadow pooled at his paws. The combination made him faster, stronger, more adaptable than any pure bloodline wolf. Of course they're afraid, Briar said. We're different now. Unknown. Every story they've ever heard says mixing bloodlines leads to monsters. Are we monsters? Kael asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. We're evolution, Briar replied. Whether that makes us monsters depends on what we do with it. Below, the first refugees were passing through the castle gates. Transformed citizens greeted them, and Briar watched carefully to see how both sides reacted. Jax was there, his Genesis abilities now fully stabilized. He approached a wolf family cautiously, and Briar saw the mother flinch back. But then Jax did something remarkable. He shifted, his body taking on a partial wolf form that no pure Lightcaster should have been able to achieve. I'm still me, Jax said, his voice carrying through the Genesis network that connected all transformed beings. Still the kid who used to steal sweet rolls from the kitchen. Still afraid of thunder. Still terrible at chess. I just have more tools now to be myself with. The wolf mother reached out tentatively, touching Jax's transformed state. When nothing terrible happened, when he simply smiled his 14-year-old smile, something in her expression softened. "This is how it begins," Elder Morphia said, materializing beside Briar with the unsettling habit all transformed beings had developed, moving through space in ways that defied normal physics. One cautious connection at a time. One moment of discovering that difference doesn't mean danger. "And if they never accept us?" Briar asked. "If the divide becomes permanent, transformed versus pure bloodline? Then we've simply created a different separation," Morphia admitted. "But at least this one was chosen rather than imposed. That has to count for something." A commotion drew their attention to the western courtyard. Briar's enhanced senses picked up distress, anger, fear mixing in a volatile combination. She moved without thinking, space folding around her as she transported directly to the source of conflict, an ability her transformation had granted. Kael appeared beside her a heartbeat later, having learned the same technique. They found Vesper backed against a wall by 3 pure bloodline wolves, young males, barely adults, their eyes gleaming with predatory intent. "Abomination," one spat. "You're not natural. Not wolf, not light, not anything real." "I'm real enough to defend myself," Vesper said, her voice steady despite her fear. Silver light and shadow pooled at her fingertips, ready to strike. "Stand down," Kael commanded, his alpha authority making all 3 wolves flinch. "Now." "Your Majesty," the leader said, though he didn't back away from Vesper. "You don't understand. These transform things, they're spreading corruption. My sister touched one, and now she wants to transform too. Wants to give up her pure wolf bloodline for this mixture." "Your sister wants a choice," Briar said, keeping her voice calm despite her anger. "The same choice we all had. Transform or don't, both are valid." "But she's choosing wrong," the young wolf insisted. "Choosing to become something unnatural." "Who decides what's natural?" Vesper challenged. "You? The first council, who separated us out of fear? Nature is changing. Evolution. Adaptation. We're just doing what nature's always done, becoming what we need to be to survive." "You're justifying your own monstrosity," another wolf snarled. "Enough," Marcus said, appearing with several other transformed adults. His presence made the wolves back up. The Shadow King's reputation still carried weight. "You're afraid. I understand fear better than most. But fear doesn't give you permission to threaten children." "She's not a child anymore," the wolf leader said. "She's something else. Something that shouldn't exist." "I'm 16, Vesper said quietly. "I like poetry and hate carrots and want to learn to fly someday." The transformation didn't change those things. It just gave me more ways to be myself. The wolves stared at her, clearly struggling between their ingrained prejudices and the evidence before them. A girl, just a girl, who happened to have abilities that crossed bloodline boundaries. "Your sister is waiting for you," Briar told the wolf leader. "In the Eastern Gardens. She wants to talk about her choice. Maybe you should listen before you decide what's monstrous." The 3 wolves left reluctantly, their hostility temporarily deflated, but not eliminated. "That's the 5th incident today," Marcus reported once they were gone. "And it's only midday. The returning refugees are destabilizing the fragile peace we'd established." "They have a right to return," Briar said. "This is their home too." "I know," Marcus agreed. "But we need to address the fundamental tension. Transformed citizens feel judged and threatened. Pure bloodline citizens feel their way of life is under attack. Both are partially right. So, what do we do?" Kael asked. "We create space for both," Elder Morphia suggested. "Districts where transformation is encouraged for those who want to explore their Genesis abilities. Districts where traditional bloodline practice is maintained for those who prefer it. And shared spaces where both can interact on neutral ground." "That sounds like segregation with extra steps," Vesper said. "It's self-determination," Morphia corrected. "Letting people choose their comfort level while maintaining connection points. Not perfect, but better than forcing integration that breeds resentment." Briar considered this. It wasn't the unified utopia she'd envisioned, but perhaps utopia had never been the goal. Perhaps the goal was simply creating space for people to choose their own paths without forcing conformity in either direction. We'll propose it at tonight's council meeting, she decided. Give both populations voice and how we restructure. The day continued with similar challenges. A Lightcaster merchant refused to sell to transformed customers. A transformed child accidentally used Genesis abilities in a way that frightened pure bloodline children. Two families nearly came to blows over whether a wedding should follow traditional or transformed customs. Each incident was small, but together they painted a picture of a kingdom still deeply divided despite, or perhaps because of, the transformation. By evening, Briar was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the emotional weight of leading a people who couldn't agree on what they wanted to become. The council meeting brought no easy answers. We should require all citizens to either transform or leave, Councillor Thane argued, a newly transformed wolf whose zealotry for Genesis abilities had become concerning. Remaining pure bloodline is choosing division over unity. We should ban further transformations until we understand long-term effects, Councillor Brennan countered, a pure bloodline Lightcaster who'd returned from evacuation. We're changing too fast, without proper study or caution. Back and forth, arguments that revealed the fundamental tension. Those who'd transformed wanted validation that their choice was right, while those who'd remained pure wanted assurance that their choice was equally valued. Enough, Briar said finally, her Genesis power making the word resonate through the chamber. We're not requiring anything. Not transformation, not traditional practice, not any single way of being. She stood, addressing both sides. 6 months ago, I was dying in a dungeon because people decided there was only one acceptable way to exist. I refuse to build a kingdom on that same foundation, even if the specifics are different. So, we just accept division? Thane challenged. We accept complexity, Briar corrected. We accept that unity doesn't mean uniformity. That people can choose different paths and still be part of the same kingdom. That transformation is valid, and so is remaining as you are. But the Genesis children, Rhiannon interjected. They're caught between both worlds. Too transformed for pure bloodline acceptance, too young to fully integrate with transformed adults. Where do they fit? It was Jax who answered, standing from where he'd been observing with the other Genesis children. We fit where we make space for ourselves, he said with remarkable maturity at 14. We don't need you to accept us, though it would be nice. We just need you to not actively prevent us from existing. We'll create our own community, if we have to. Figure out our own customs. Build our own normal. The council fell silent, chastened by wisdom from an unexpected source. Perhaps that's the answer, Elder Morphia said softly. Not one kingdom trying to be unified, but one kingdom learning to be plural. Multiple communities, multiple approaches, held together by shared governance and mutual respect rather than forced conformity. It wasn't the beautiful vision Briar had dreamed of during those 6 years in darkness. It was messy and complicated and imperfect, but it was real. And maybe real was more important than perfect. We'll try it, Briar decided. Create districts with different focuses. Establish shared governance that represents all communities. And most importantly, we keep talking. Keep negotiating. Keep figuring this out together, even when it's hard. The council agreed, though not enthusiastically. But agreement wasn't the same as certainty, and Briar was learning that leadership often meant accepting uncertainty as the price of progress. That night, lying in Kael's arms, Briar felt her transformation more keenly than ever. Not the physical changes, those had stabilized, but the internal shift from idealistic hope to pragmatic reality. I thought unity would look different, she admitted. Cleaner. More obviously, successful. Unity is a process, not a destination, Kael replied. We're not done. Maybe we never will be. Maybe that's the point. Through their bond, she felt his certainty. Not that everything would work out perfectly, but that they would keep trying regardless of difficulty. The evacuated citizens who haven't returned, Briar said. What if they never do? What if we've permanently fractured the kingdom? Then we've created something new, Kael said. Not what was, but what is. Multiple communities connected by history and governance, but pursuing different visions of what life can be. That's not failure. That's evolution on a societal level. Briar wanted to argue, but exhaustion and transformation and the weight of impossible choices had worn away her resistance to complexity. Maybe this was what the Genesis Bridge had always meant. Not erasing differences, but creating connection points across them. Not forcing unity, but making space for it to develop organically among those who chose it. Outside, the kingdom settled into an uneasy night. Transformed citizens in their districts, pure bloodline citizens in theirs, and shared spaces carefully negotiated between. It wasn't perfect, but it was trying. And maybe trying was all anyone could ask. Chapter 14. 1 year later. The anniversary celebration was Jax's idea. We need to mark it, he'd insisted during the planning council meeting. 1 year since the transformation. 1 year since we chose to become something new. That deserves recognition. Now, standing in the renovated Grand Plaza, designed specifically to accommodate all communities, Briar watched thousands gather for the commemoration. Transformed citizens mingled with pure bloodline wolves, Lightcasters, and shadow-touched. Not perfectly integrated, but present.
Trying.
The past year has been brutal. For attempted coups by pure bloodline extremists who believed transformation was corruption. 2 incidents of transformed citizens using their abilities to intimidate or harm those who'd remained unchanged. Countless smaller conflicts over resources, representation, cultural practices. But there had been victories too. The Genesis Academy, where transformed children learned to master abilities that had no historical precedent. The Bridger program, pairing transformed and pure bloodline citizens for collaborative projects. The Treaty of Plural Unity, establishing that both transformation and traditional practice were equally valid life choices. Nervous? Kael asked, appearing beside her in his formal regalia, black and silver that honored both his wolf heritage and his transformed nature. Terrified, Briar admitted. A year ago, I thought transformation would solve our divisions. Now, I'm giving a speech about learning to live with them. Growth looks different than we expected, Kael said. Doesn't make it less valuable. The ceremony began with Elder Morphea's traditional blessing, words in the old language that predated the Great Severing, reminding everyone of a time when separation hadn't yet been conceived. Then Marcus stepped forward. The Shadow King's presence still made some citizens uncomfortable, but his year of consistent service had earned grudging respect. He'd mediated disputes, counseled troubled youth, and served as liaison to the Northern Wastes, which had begun its own gradual transformation process after watching Silver Peak's experiment. 1 year ago, Marcus began, his transformed voice carrying through the plaza. My daughter risked everything on a belief that evolution was possible, that people could choose to become something new without losing what made them themselves. He paused, his eyes finding Briar's in the crowd. I'd spent decades believing the opposite. That change was corruption. That purity mattered more than growth. That love across bloodline boundaries was weakness rather than strength. My mate died because of those beliefs. My daughter suffered 6 years in darkness because of them. And I stand here transformed, literally and metaphorically, because she chose to prove me wrong. Emotion thickened his voice. This year hasn't been what any of us expected. It's been harder, messier, more complicated than the dreams that sustained us through transformation. But it's been real. And I'll take complicated reality over comfortable illusion any day. Applause rippled through the crowd. Not universal, but genuine. Vesper spoke next, representing the Genesis children who'd grown into Genesis adolescents over the past year. When I was 14, she said, I spent every day in a cell, having my tears harvested for poison. I thought that was all my existence would ever be, suffering for someone else's benefit. Then Queen Briar found us, freed us, gave us the choice to transform. And for the past year, I've learned what it means to be free. Not safe. Freedom and safety aren't the same thing. But free to make mistakes, to grow, to become whoever I'm meant to be. She looked at the transformed youth surrounding her, Nearly 200 children and teenagers who'd chosen Genesis abilities. We're the first generation born into possibility instead of separation. We don't have history telling us what we can't do, so we're making history by doing it anyway. Some of you think we're abominations, Vesper continued, her gaze sweeping across the pure bloodline sections. That we've corrupted something sacred. But I think we're just kids trying to figure out who we are, same as kids have always done. The magic is different. The struggle is universal. More applause, stronger this time. Then Briar took the stage. She'd agonized over this speech for weeks, trying to find words that honored both the triumph and the difficulty of the past year. Looking out at the crowd, at transformed and unchanged faces, at hope and skepticism mixed together, she abandoned her prepared remarks. "I'm not going to lie to you," she began. "This year has been harder than anything I imagined. Harder than the dungeon in some ways because at least in darkness, I knew what I was fighting. Here, I'm fighting complexity, nuance, the reality that good intentions don't guarantee good outcomes." Uncomfortable shifting in the crowd, but they were listening. A year ago, I believed transformation would unite us. That choosing to evolve would erase the divisions that had defined us for centuries. I was wrong. Transformation didn't erase divisions. It created new ones while making old ones more complicated. But here's what I've learned. Unity isn't the absence of division. It's the choice to stay connected despite division. To keep talking even when conversations are hard. To keep negotiating even when compromise feels like losing. Briar's Genesis stone pulsed at her throat, resonating with the hundreds of others worn by transformed citizens. Those of us who transformed didn't become better than those who didn't. We became different. And difference isn't a value judgment. It's just a fact that requires navigation. She turned to address the pure bloodline sections specifically. To those of you who chose to remain as you are, your choice was valid. You're not cowards for prioritizing safety over unknown risk. You're not backwards for honoring traditions that sustained your people for generations. You're just making different choices than we did, and that's allowed. Then to the transformed sections, and to those of us who chose Genesis abilities, we're not more evolved, more enlightened, or more brave. We're just different. Our choice to transform doesn't invalidate anyone else's choice to remain unchanged. Pride in what we've become shouldn't require devaluing what others are. Silence as both groups process this. So, what does the future look like? Briar continued. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe in another year, we'll have figured out seamless integration. Maybe in 10 years, transformation will be so common that being pure bloodline is the exception. Or maybe we'll remain distinct communities that share governance, but pursue separate visions of what life should be. All of those futures are acceptable. What's not acceptable is violence, suppression, or forcing anyone to be something they're not, whether that's forcing transformation or forcing traditional practice. Briar took a breath. The Genesis Bridge isn't a destination. It's infrastructure. A framework that makes connection possible for those who want it while respecting the autonomy of those who don't. That's all it ever was. All it ever could be. So today, on the first anniversary of transformation, I'm not celebrating perfect unity. I'm celebrating the fact that we're all still here. Still trying. Still choosing connection over complete separation, even when it's hard. That's enough. That has to be enough. The applause that followed was complicated. Enthusiastic from some sections, polite from others, absent from a few. But it was honest. Real in a way forced unity never could be. As Briar descended from the stage, Jax intercepted her with a group of Genesis adolescents. That was perfect, he said. Not what anyone expected, but true. We needed truth more than inspiration. Truth doesn't always feel good, Briar replied. No, Vesper agreed. But it's better than comfortable lies. The celebration continued with performances from all communities, traditional wolf shifting demonstrations, Lightcaster illumination dances, shadow-touched void weaving, and Genesis children showcasing abilities that blended all three. Not competing, just sharing. Showing what each community had to offer. Briar found herself standing beside a mother she recognized, the wolf woman who'd initially flinched from Jax a year ago. Your Majesty, the woman said with a respectful nod. I wanted to thank you. For what? Briar asked, genuinely curious. For admitting it's hard. For not pretending everything's perfect. The woman hesitated. My daughter transformed 6 months ago. Against my wishes. I was so angry and felt so betrayed. But listening to you today, you're right.
Her choice isn't about me.
It's about her becoming who she needs to be. Have you reconciled? Briar asked gently. We're trying, the woman said. She's coming to dinner tonight. First time in months. I don't understand her choices, but I'm learning that understanding isn't required for love. Briar felt tears prick her eyes. That might be the wisest thing anyone said all day. As the celebration wound down, Kael found Briar watching the sunset from the plaza's edge. The sky painted itself in gold and silver and shadow gray, the colors of their transformed kingdom. What are you thinking? He asked. That a year ago, I thought transformation was the answer, Briar said. Now I realize it was just the beginning of better questions. Such as, how do we honor tradition while embracing change? How do we create space for those who want to transform without devaluing those who don't? How do we build connections across differences instead of demanding uniformity? Those are complicated questions, Kael observed. Yes, Briar agreed. But maybe that's okay. Maybe leadership isn't about having perfect answers. It's about asking better questions and staying present while we work toward imperfect solutions. Through their bond, she felt his pride, his love, his absolute commitment to navigating complexity together. The evacuees who still haven't returned, Briar said. I got word today that they've established 3 permanent settlements beyond our borders. They're creating their own communities, pure bloodline only by choice. How do you feel about that? Sad, Briar admitted, but also accepting. They're making the choice that feels right for them. That's what self-determination looks like, even when it means separation. Do you think they'll ever come back?
Some might.
Their children or grandchildren, perhaps, when enough time has passed that our transformation feels less threatening. Or maybe they won't. Maybe that's okay too. Kael pulled her close, and they stood together watching their complicated, imperfect, stubbornly hopeful kingdom settle into evening. Below them, Genesis children played with pure bloodline wolves. Not all children, not all wolves, but enough. Transformed adults shared a meal with unchanged neighbors, conversations awkward but genuine. The Genesis Academy's lights glowed beside the traditional practice center, both institutions thriving in parallel. It wasn't the unity Briar had dreamed of in that dungeon cell. It was better. It was real. And 1 year after choosing transformation over stagnation, Silver Peak was learning the hardest lesson of all, that growth never ends, that becoming is a process without a finish line, and that the bravest thing anyone can do is keep trying even when perfection proves impossible. The Genesis Bridge stood. Imperfect, complicated, frequently strained, but standing. And tomorrow, they'd wake up and keep building it. One choice, one connection, one difficult conversation at a time. Forever. 5 years forward. The letter arrived on a morning that tasted like autumn, crisp and golden, the kind of day that promised change. Briar sat in her private study, now lined with 5 years' worth of journals documenting the kingdom's evolution. She'd made it a practice to write daily, recording both triumphs and failures with equal honesty. Someday, when other kingdoms attempted their own transformations, they'd need real accounts, not sanitized histories. The letter bore the seal of the Northern Wastes, Calypso's mark, though the handwriting was unfamiliar. Queen Briar. You don't know me, but my name is Sable, and I'm 17 years old. 5 years ago, when I was 12, I watched from the wastes as your kingdom transformed. My parents told me it was madness, that you were destroying everything sacred about bloodline purity. 3 years ago, I manifested Genesis abilities spontaneously. No transformation ceremony, no choice, just woke up one day with silver light and shadow both answering to my call. My parents said I was cursed, corrupted by proximity to Silver Peak's influence. 2 years ago, they sent me away, said I couldn't stay in the wastes looking like this. like evidence that the separation wasn't as absolute as everyone claimed. Ambassador Calypso found me, brought me to Silver Peak. And for 2 years, I've been studying at your Genesis Academy, learning to control abilities no one in the Wastes would acknowledge could exist. Yesterday, I received a letter from my mother. She's sick, dying, the healers say.
She wants to see me before the end.
Wants to apologize, she says, though I don't know if I'm ready to forgive. But here's why I'm writing to you. I'm not the only one. There are 37 of us now, children from the Wastes who manifested Genesis abilities spontaneously, who were sent away or fled, who found safety in your kingdom when our birthplace rejected us. We want to go home, not to stay. Silver Peak is home now in ways the Wastes never were, but to visit,
To show our families that we survived.
that transformation didn't destroy us. That maybe, just maybe, the fear that drove them to reject us wasn't justified. But we're afraid. Afraid they'll try to bind our abilities, lock us up like you were locked up. Afraid that going back means putting ourselves at the mercy of people who've already proven they'll choose fear over love. So we're asking, will you come with us? Will you stand with us when we return to the Wastes and show them that Genesis beings aren't monsters? That we're just people. Complicated people with complicated magic, but people nonetheless. I know it's a lot to ask. You're a queen. You have responsibilities here. But you're also the first. The one who proved transformation was possible. If anyone can show the Wastes that we're not threats, it's you. Please consider it. Respectfully, Sable Nightshade. Briar read the letter 3 times, feeling each word settle into her chest like stones building a foundation for something she hadn't anticipated. 5 years since the transformation, and its echoes were still spreading. She found Kael in the training yard, sparring with Jax, who, at 19, had become one of the kingdom's most skilled Genesis warriors. Watching them fight was like watching poetry. Kael's wolf-enhanced speed meeting Jax's light and shadow flexibility, both adapting and countering in real time. I need to travel to the Northern Wastes, Briar said without preamble when they paused. Kael didn't question, just waited for an explanation. She handed him the letter. I watched his expression shift from curiosity to understanding to concern. It's dangerous, he said finally. The Wastes barely tolerate our alliance. Bringing Genesis beings, especially their own exiled children, back could trigger conflict. I know, Briar said, but they're asking. And I remember what it felt like to be rejected for existing. If I can spare them even a fraction of that pain, then we go, Kael finished. But we got prepared. Full diplomatic envoy, security detail, and we make it clear this is an official visit from Silver Peak, not a covert infiltration. Agreed, Briar said. Jax, who'd been listening, spoke up. I want to come. I'm Genesis-born, transformed young. If the Wastes need to see that we're functional adults, not corrupted children, I should be there. It's going to be hostile, Kael warned. Good, Jax said with a grin that reminded Briar of the brave 14-year-old boy who'd first manifested Genesis abilities. I'm excellent at being hostile. The preparations took 2 weeks. Briar assembled a delegation of 30, Genesis beings of varying ages and abilities, diplomatic staff, security personnel, and several pure bloodline citizens who volunteered to show that the transformed and unchanged could travel together peacefully. Vesper insisted on coming. At 21, she'd become one of the kingdom's most gifted Genesis healers, specializing in helping people navigate the psychological trauma of transformation or rejection. Half those exiled children are going to have complex feelings about seeing their families, Vesper said. They'll need support, not just protection. Marcus asked to join as well. The Wastes remember me as Shadow King. Maybe seeing what transformation did to me, how it changed what I thought possible, will carry weight. Elder Morphia declined, claiming her ancient bones weren't suited for travel anymore. But she provided something more valuable, a letter of introduction to the Wastes Elder Council, written in the Old Language, invoking protocols that predated the Great Severing. They can refuse a queen, Morphia said. But they can't refuse a formal request under ancient guest right. Not without violating laws older than their fear. The journey to the Northern Wastes took 5 days, Longer than necessary because Briar insisted on moving slowly, giving the exiled children time to process their emotions before confronting their families. Around campfires at night, stories emerged. Sable, whose parents had loved her fiercely until Genesis abilities made her undeniable evidence that the separation was failing. Who'd been sent away not with cruelty but with tears, her mother whispering, "I'm sorry," even as she turned Sable over to Calypso's care. Ronan, 16, whose father had tried to bind his abilities with Shadow Curse, the same method used on Briar years ago. Who'd escaped and walked for 3 weeks to reach Silver Peak, nearly dying of exposure and starvation. Mira, 14, who'd manifested Genesis abilities during a public ceremony, whose entire village had watched her transform from proper Shadow Touch child to something they couldn't categorize, who'd been cast out immediately, given supplies but told never to return. Each story was different. Each story was the same. Children rejected for being themselves, finding safety in a kingdom built on accepting the impossible. What if they haven't changed? Ronan asked on the 4th night. What if we go back and they still hate us? Then you'll know, Briar said gently. And knowing, even when the truth is painful, is better than wondering forever. What if they have changed? Mira countered. What if they want us back, want us to stay, to be who they wanted instead of who we are? Then you'll still choose, Briar replied. Because that's what this trip is about, not reconciliation necessarily, but closure. Showing them who you've become and letting them decide how to respond. Their reaction says everything about them and nothing about your worth. The wastes appeared on the horizon at dawn of the 6th day, a landscape of dark stone and deep shadows, beautiful in its darkness. The capital, Umbrellas, rose like a crown of obsidian against the gray sky. They were met at the border by a delegation led by Lord Kieran, the Waste's primary liaison to foreign powers. His expression was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. Queen Briar, he said with a bow that was respectful, but not deferential. Your letter invoked ancient guest right. We are bound by honor to grant you safe passage. But not pleased to do so, Briar observed. You bring our exiled children back, Kieran said bluntly. Children we rejected for their own safety and ours. This creates complications. They're not children anymore, Jax interjected. And we're not asking for asylum. Just the chance to visit families who might want to see us. Kieran's gaze swept over the Genesis beings, lingering on the visible signs of their transformation, eyes that shifted color, shadows that moved independently, light that flickered beneath skin. You'll be housed in the diplomatic quarter, he said finally. No Genesis abilities are to be used within city limits except in designated practice areas. Any violation will result in immediate expulsion. Understood. Briar agreed, though the term stung. When can families visit? That's not my decision, Kieran said. It's theirs. We've sent word that the exiled have returned. Whether anyone responds. He shrugged. They were escorted to quarters that were comfortable but clearly monitored. Briar felt eyes on them constantly, guards, yes, but also curious citizens who'd heard rumors of Genesis beings, but never seen them. The first family arrived that evening. Sable's mother came alone, looking older than the 40 years Sable had described. She stood in the doorway, staring at her daughter with an expression so complex it defied categorization. You're alive, she whispered. Did you think I wouldn't be? Sable asked, her voice carefully neutral despite the tears threatening. I didn't know what to think. The stories we heard, that transformation was torture, that Genesis beings went mad, that...
She stopped. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry I sent you away. Are you sorry you sent me away? Sable asked, or sorry for the reasons you sent me away? The question hung heavy between them. Sable's mother looked at her daughter, truly looked at her, taking in the silver-threaded shadow abilities, the confidence that came from acceptance rather than rejection, the young woman she'd become in the Waste's absence. Both, she said finally. I was afraid of what you'd become. Now I'm afraid of what I made you become by casting you out. It wasn't the reunion Sable had hoped for, but it was honest. And honesty, Briar was learning, mattered more than comfort. Over the next 3 days, other families trickled in. Some reunions were joyful, parents weeping apologies, siblings embracing despite years of separation. Others were tense, punctuated by accusations and justifications that satisfied no one. And some families never came at all. Ronan waited for 2 days before accepting that his father wouldn't visit. He's ashamed. A messenger finally delivered. Of what he did. Of how you survived it. He can't face you. That's his choice, Ronan said, voice steady despite the pain Briar could feel radiating from him. I came for closure, not forgiveness. Now I have it. But the most significant moment came on the 4th day, when the Waste Elder Council requested a formal audience with Briar. She entered their chambers, a space carved entirely from shadowstone that absorbed light, accompanied by Kael, Marcus, and Jax as representatives of Genesis transformation. 5 elders sat in judgment, their faces severe with the weight of centuries of tradition. You've brought corruption to our doorstep, Elder Thorn said without preamble. Children twisted by Genesis magic, flaunting their transformed nature as if it were achievement rather than aberration. I've brought people, Briar corrected calmly. People you cast out for circumstances beyond their control. People who wanted the chance to show their families that they survived. They survived by betraying their bloodline, another elder, Cassandra, said coldly. By accepting corruption instead of maintaining purity. Define corruption, Jax challenged, stepping forward. Because from where I stand, the corruption was in adults who rejected children for being different. I had Genesis abilities forced on me by proximity to Queen Briar's transformation. I didn't choose this. But I chose how to respond, with acceptance instead of fear. That's not corruption. That's an adaptation. Adaptation is how we describe surrender, Thorn snapped. The First Council separated bloodlines for a reason. The First Council was afraid, Marcus interrupted, his transformed eyes meeting Thorn's steadily. I was the Shadow King for decades. I enforced separation with brutality. And I was wrong. The separation wasn't protecting us, it was limiting us. You're biased, Cassandra said. You've been transformed, corrupted by. I've been freed, Marcus corrected. Freed from the prison of believing there was only one acceptable way to exist. And yes, that makes me biased. But at least I'm honestly biased rather than hiding fear behind tradition. The elders bristled, but before they could respond, Briar spoke. You didn't ask us here to debate philosophy. You asked us here because you're afraid. Afraid that spontaneous Genesis manifestation is increasing. Afraid that the separation you've maintained for centuries is failing regardless of your efforts to preserve it. Afraid that if transformation is possible, then everything you've built on bloodline purity becomes meaningless. She leaned forward. But here's what you haven't considered. Those exiled children? They're the fortunate ones. They found safety in Silver Peak, learned to control their abilities, built lives where they're accepted. What about the ones who manifested Genesis abilities but never made it out? Who is hiding right now in the wastes, terrified that you'll discover them and cast them out too? Silence, heavy and damning. How many? Briar pressed. How many children are suffering in secret because you've made transformation a crime instead of a reality to navigate? We don't know, Elder Thorn admitted finally, grudgingly. Manifestations are rare enough that. They're increasing, Briar interrupted. In Silver Peak, we're seeing spontaneous Genesis abilities in children who've never undergone formal transformation. Second-generation effects from parents who transformed 5 years ago. The separation is failing, Elder Thorn. Not because we're forcing it to fail, but because evolution doesn't require permission. So, what do you propose? Cassandra asked, her tone suggesting she expected demands for forced transformation. Nothing, Briar said simply. I propose you do nothing differently unless you choose to. But if, when more children manifest Genesis abilities, send them to Silver Peak. Let them learn control in an environment that accepts them. Let their families visit if they want. Maintain your purity traditions for those who prefer them. But stop punishing children for biological responses beyond their control. That's asking us to accept defeat, Thorn said. That's asking you to accept reality, Briar countered, and to extend basic compassion to your own children. The council deliberated in hushed tones. Finally, Elder Morgan, who'd been silent until now, spoke. We'll consider a trial program. Genesis manifestors under 18 can travel to Silver Peak for training, with the understanding that they may return to the wastes after gaining control if they wish. Families may visit under diplomatic provisions. But we will not endorse transformation, will not encourage it, and will maintain our traditional bloodline practices. That's acceptable, Briar said. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As they left the council chambers, Sable approached with the other exiled children. We're not going back, she said. Not permanently. Silver Peak is home now. But, she smiled, tentative but genuine. But maybe someday, we can visit without needing diplomatic envoys and ancient guest right. Maybe someday, the wastes will see us as people first and Genesis second. Maybe, Briar agreed. Though I won't promise it. The only thing I can promise is that Silver Peak will always have space for those who need it. The journey home felt different than the journey out. Lighter, somehow, despite the mixed results of reunions. You know what I realized? Jack said as Silver Peak came into view. 5 years ago, we thought transformation would solve our problems. Now we realize transformation is just another complexity to navigate. But at least it's a complexity that includes more people instead of excluding them. Briar looked at her kingdom, her complicated, imperfect, stubbornly evolving kingdom, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace wasn't the absence of problems. It was the presence of systems to address problems compassionately. Unity wasn't everyone being the same. It was everyone having space to be different while remaining connected. And leadership wasn't about having perfect solutions. It was about showing up, listening honestly, and adjusting course when necessary. 5 years since transformation, and Briar was finally learning what the Genesis Bridge had always meant. Not a destination, but a journey. Not a solution, but an invitation. Not perfection, but possibility. And that would have to be enough. Because in a world learning to accept complexity, enough was everything.